Hello, everyone, and welcome to my talk for EUROCALL 2022. I'm Dr. Peter Crosswade, reporting in from the University of Queensland, Australia. It's my pleasure to be presenting at this conference again this year, together with my co-author on this project, Alicia Gasmuri-Seinheiser, and today we're going to talk about something that Tim Johns mentioned back in the 1990s in terms of how corpora and data-driven learning are intended to cut out the middleman in terms of students having access to language data. The original kind of conceptualization of this was for the teacher to be cut out, but in this case, I proposed an additional step that is usually required within data-driven learning context, that of the applied linguist being the middleman between the teachers and the students, usually me. So we're going to see what happens when we take myself out of the equation and think about teachers' perceptions of doing DDL with an applied linguist, not entirely absent, but much more in the background than you would ordinarily see in most DDL studies. So let's get into it. There have been numerous uses of corpora for education. These include areas of language testing, lexicography, materials development, syllabus development, and obviously the one that we're going to be focusing on today is the direct use of corpora for language teaching and learning, in other words, known as data-driven learning, hands-on use of corpora for education. From a theoretical perspective, the inquiry-based learning approach that is espoused by DDL proponents is intended to lead to the number of benefits that you can see here on the diagram, including engagement in solving problems, higher order thinking when composed at the individual level, scaffolded and collaborative inquiries when conducted in classroom settings together with teacher and peer activities, and lots of different things going on in classroom and non-classroom contexts that are purported to come to fruition as a result of learners' engagement with corpora. This can be done in a variety of different ways. The traditional reading of concordance lines in quick or sentence view, and increasingly as advances in corpus technology and corpus tools develop, we are now exposing students to frequency-based abstractions and patterns within corpus data. These are often presented in visual sense, as you can see here in the format with diagrams and graphics that help to illustrate some of the trends and things that are happening in corpora without necessarily overloading the learner with a flood of textual information. And even in my own research, we see that learners like to make use of different uses of textual information, visual information, statistical information, and so on. So that's how you do it. Does it work? Well, the research to date, and there have been numerous surveys and meta-analyses conducted that appear to suggest that yes, in certain circumstances and for certain areas of language development, the learner's use of corpora is beneficial. Whether this is under pre or post-test experimental conditions, or in more less structured environments, the individual classroom level, gains are typically found for vocabulary, understanding of, say, register and genre, primarily for second language writing, with a much smaller number of studies on first language development. And yeah, lots of wonderful research that you can go ahead and find any of these reviews and get the positive spin on the use of corpora in the language learning across a wide range of teaching and learning contexts. So myself and Alex Bolden pulled it out in an article which is due out soon, I believe, a number of major issues for the field. I don't have time to spell all of these out today, but the two in bold are the ones that I'm going to be dealing with, namely that in the vast majority of studies, it is someone who may be a language teacher themselves, but they will have a background in applied linguistics. They may well be a researcher in applied linguistics at a university, and they will then implement their own data-driven learning activities within courses that they teach at the university level, or as we're beginning to see in the literature, and as some of my own research has done, where you get the applied linguist who will then pay visits to schools or teacher training institutes, give a few workshops on data-driven learning there. But in each case, you're kind of seeing the applied linguist or people like myself as the visitor, and the success of the exercise is probably in many ways more important for me as a researcher than it might be for the teachers or the students involved. You know, I want to publish a good paper. I want to have a good outcome. I want to promote DDL to the research community, but this can sometimes, and maybe even in some of my earlier experiences, that there's a tendency to have the teachers and students as just part of the puzzle rather than actually being like the primary stakeholders involved in the data-driven learning intervention, and the success or failure of that intervention should really be up to them and on their terms rather than on the terms of the applied linguist or the researcher. And of course, we need lots more DDL studies of learners other than tertiary students, and especially for English. Well, certainly, those two are the ones that I'm going to be tackling in today's talk. So I already mentioned before about the notion of data-driven learning, and according to what many consider as the founder of data-driven learning, Tim Johns, back in the 1990s, said that data-driven learning is an attempt to cut out the middleman as far as possible. And again, in his conceptualization, the middleman is the teacher. So the idea was that by giving learners access to corpus data, that they might be able to discover patterns for themselves and learn things for themselves without the input or guidance of the teacher. However, as I already mentioned just a moment ago as well, we often have two middlemen. One is the teacher, and I think the idea of cutting out the teacher from the equation is probably not the best way of thinking about how to run a DDL intervention. The other middleman is people like myself, researchers who want to go and do good research and promote DDL, but then having that person, like myself, as the main stakeholder, rather than the actual teachers involved in the classroom and the students and their institutions, may be problematic, and it can lead to results that when the applied linguist leaves the building, leaves the room, then the DDL intervention stops. There's no need for the teacher or the school or students to keep going because they're no longer under the scrutiny of the researcher, and they may just go back to doing the things that they used to do before. And we have very little information on how teachers go with DDL when the applied linguist is not present or is not the main driving factor in the DDL intervention. So in research that I've been conducting for the past couple of years, both immediately kind of during the pandemic and then in the post-pandemic period, I've been working with an all-girls grammar school in Queensland, Australia, and I've provided a number of teacher training workshops on data-driven learning for a variety of different kinds of teachers, different subject content teachers. And the main groups who I worked with for the longest period of time were a group of girls who were using data-driven learning to learn about science report writing, and then a smaller group of girls who speak English as an additional language or dialect, including about 40% Indigenous Australian students who were using data-driven learning to improve their writing in general, but also specifically to learn about cognitive verbs. So for both of these groups, I basically applied the same kind of intervention technique in that I developed online activities through an online learning platform called edX that provides scaffolded introductions into some of the more popular online corpus tools such as Skell or Sketch Engine, Lingual, and Flax. Those are the four that I was mainly using, mainly due to their availability and the fact that they're online and easy to get up and running. And I would develop activities based on the teacher's kind of target language areas, which involved scaffolded activities, getting students used to the basics of corpus consultation, using those tools. And then the idea was that they would go off and use those tools to improve the different kinds of writing that they were doing. But crucially, I was not in the classroom with them doing this stuff. My input was limited to some basic consultations with the teachers and then the development of the online materials. So it was the teachers in the classrooms then who were responsible for driving the students into the activities, providing assistance and support, outlining to them the need for what they were doing, the learning outcomes, the different processes involved, dealing with student expectations and managing all of those different things. So the teachers obviously had to be quite motivated, or at least, I felt that they would be in doing that. And that it was really coming from them rather than something that was coming from me. And for me personally, that's the first time that I've been in a kind of research situation where that has happened organically. So while I did take the same approach with both students, we ended up with markedly different results. Science girls overall were very positive, took to the DDL intervention in a very positive way. We had demonstrated impact on their ability to produce the passive voice construction, which was very important in the research report genre that they were involved in writing. When they were using Corpora, not for the passive, but under their own steam, we saw impact on vocabulary development and revision processes in response to written corrective feedback. And we also saw a very small number of students continuing to use the corpus technology after the intervention was complete. So there was a study out this year, just a few months ago, in computer-assisted language learning, which reveals what happened there. However, with the English as an additional language or dialect group, the intervention didn't work really very well at all. There was limited uptake in the online training. There was fairly negative attitudes to the intervention from both the students as well as the teachers involved. We did try to switch things around halfway through and drop the online component and try to really hammer the use of Corpora for the response to writing from the context of responding to written corrective feedback. That received much more buy-in and much more positive evaluation. But then we hit a kind of really tough COVID period and left the students for quite some time. And then when we returned, they felt that it wasn't something they wanted to continue. So in terms of what I'm going to talk about today, we conducted some semi-structured interviews with the two teachers from each group. We asked them about their perceptions of data-driven learning following the training, but before the actual intervention. So that by training, I mean the workshops that I gave to all staff, upon which then the teachers came to me with their ideas of what they wanted to do. Perceptions of the training materials that I developed for them, evaluation of the intervention and any suggestions that they had for the future. These interview transcripts were then coded and analyzed for themes using the appropriate methodological techniques by my colleague, Ms. Swanheiser. So let's dive straight into the results here. And looking at the perceptions of data-driven learning by the science teachers, you can see that the first impressions were not tremendous. Particularly, one of the teachers was quite vociferous in their distaste and kind of a lack of sense of understanding of the purpose for data-driven learning. Although they did help, or they had expectations for data-driven learning that were perhaps never going to be realized, such as helping students to write fluently and be able to identify mistakes in their writing. So clearly there, the way that the DDL was sold to them didn't originally spark interest, although it has to be said that they did want to give it a go, despite initially negative attitudes to this. They felt it would be, for example, very little to do with science, great for language and humanities related subjects. It wouldn't fit into their curriculum. It would take too long. And then, of course, the other teacher who was actually the head of the science department and the one that I suppose I really had to convince was quite a bit more positive, with comments such as brilliant idea. But yeah, certainly we were not writing miracles, identifying mistakes. There was some management of expectation that had to be carried out there with the science. Whereas the English as additional language and dialect teachers were much more positive in their kind of initial expectations for DDL and what they thought that it might be able to help them do. For example, giving them a tool to be independent learners, helping them consolidate existing knowledge, make connections with words and meanings and so on. And you can see here a couple of the quotes that they came out with. In particular, they wanted to really help them to consolidate the knowledge that they already had and have that knowledge be able to be queried and confirmed through corpus consultation in a self-guided manner. Following then the actual DDL intervention, the science teachers became much more positive once they'd actually gone through the process of delivering a DDL intervention to their own students. They realized that the approach had massive potential. It provided students with the exposure to language features that they might not necessarily have got through limited reading or exposure to science in their earlier study years. They felt that as the students got better with using the corpora and becoming more agile in creating queries and understanding the kind of results that they got, that there was a lot of usefulness there and a lot of gains to be realized. And their outcomes, their expectations of the outcomes became much more realistic over time. However, there are still a number of issues and concerns that were raised. For example, not being able to provide one-to-one feedback on some of the DDL activities. The use of the online platform maybe was a little bit overwhelming, the online training platform. So not only were they having to learn to do DDL, but they were also having to learn to use an online training platform at the same time. So maybe more hands-on, face-to-face work within the classroom by the teacher or the applied linguist might have helped matters there. And they were also a little bit concerned about some of the results that they were getting, some of the data that they had access to. But they felt that after doing it once, that it could be done much better in the future once they realized the potential. And finally, kind of tailored their expectations about what DDL can and cannot do. The ELD teachers, on the other hand, did feel that from the written corrective feedback and from the ability to provide context for some of the language choices that their students were making were incredibly useful, and they did see evidence of their learners going in to become more independent, taking the opportunities to use Corpora's tools to mainly at the corrective level to resolve errors in their writing. But they didn't find that they very much like the students, they saw the intervention as extra work. The students began to develop a negative attitude towards the intervention and reverted back to their use of other tools that they were already used to working with, such as Google or the use of translation dictionaries and so on. They also felt that the timing of the intervention was an issue. They felt pressure of workload, and that pressure made them perhaps lose sight of the benefits of the intervention that they were engaged with. So they felt also that the instructions maybe could be a little bit easier, and that video instructions might be preferable to lots of text when designing online training materials for DDL and getting the students to understand how the different tools work and the different functions of the tool. In terms of suggestions for future practice, the science teachers agreed that a simpler interface than was the best to work with. The students' preference was overwhelmingly for the tool Lingual, as opposed to tools like Sketch Engine, which, while more powerful tools and offer more increased functionality, take quite a steep learning curve to understand how to use. And not only that, but they would also prefer to have students that, specific corpora that are written at the level of these kind of younger learners, whereas pretty much all of the existing corpora that they were being exposed to were produced by adult writers and intended for an adult audience. They felt that getting started much earlier in the school year or even within the development of the high school students themselves, so introducing this like in year 7 rather than in years 9 and 10 would be a much better approach. This would allow them to be able to plan and integrate the use of Corpora and DDL more effectively than introducing it, say, in the middle of term 2 for students in year 9. It kind of came out of nowhere there. And also the ability to integrate DDL practices within other writing skills, such as looking at text from the top down, a bit of genre analysis, for example, a bit of discourse analysis, the integrating corpus activities within that, rather than just relying on corpora as kind of the panacea that is going to help teach students how to write for a particular register or genre. Training teachers on using the tools could be improved, but obviously once they've developed that corpus literacy, corpus fluency, then I need to spend less time on that. And also tying in the corpus activities with particular assignments and assessments that students were working on. Again, so it wasn't seen as an optional extra, but something that was really going to help them complete the specific task that they were engaged in. And that's also pretty much the same for suggestions for the ELD teachers. Something that ELD teachers do, basically like their main role, is to take teaching and learning materials from other subject content areas, for example, English literature, biology, history, and so on, and then to be able to adapt those materials to make them suitable for people who speak English as an additional language or dialect, where their level of English proficiency is much lower than that of their monolingual peers. So what they would like is to have the opportunity to integrate DDL tools and training into what's called differentiation, and that's the term that they use to be able to take a quite complex text that the students have to deal with, for example, like extracts from To Kill a Mockingbird, right? The popular Harper Lee novel, which is part of their English language curriculum. And the teachers need to be able to develop activities that help students to unpack the meaning of some of the complex vocabulary and meanings within those texts that they're given. And they felt that DDL and Corpora could be really useful for doing that, in really helping with those differentiation techniques and in helping simplifying the language and presenting ways of expressing some of the key kind of constructions and meanings that they would encounter in their own words. So taking some of the expressions outside of the context of To Kill a Mockingbird, for example, and putting that into something that the students can appreciate under their own terms, like something related to their own cultural background or a social issue that they would commonly experience. So fantastic ideas there for integrating or getting DDL to work in terms of differentiating complex language materials for second language learners of English. And also in personalizing the tool to the needs of the learner was seen as really crucial. That would help to greatly improve buy-in with the students. And once you reach that level of buy-in, once you've got the students on board, okay, this is not just an optional extra, like extra homework that we're forcing you to do, but this is really something that is going to help you succeed in these ELD classes, then that is kind of the magic spark that we were missing on this intervention, but we're going to be working on providing in future interventions. So clearly, despite the failures of this particular intervention, there's a lot to build on and a lot of still kind of positive goodwill about how DDL can help these students, even if it didn't pan out in the way that we initially expected. So just to summarize, two different interventions, varying levels of success for these different interventions, despite a similar approach, which shows that DDL practitioners and applied linguists have to be clever in tailoring the DDL interventions to the specific needs of the teachers and the students. When the teachers are left as kind of the primary drivers of the DDL intervention in a classroom context, getting the teachers fully on board and having their kind of complete support is incredibly important in the success of the intervention. We know that these teachers want to help their students. They see that DDL might be able to do that, and they just need that kind of extra push in understanding how to bring those two things together. And a lot of that involves expectations about what Corpora and DDL do not do, what they cannot do. Because a lot of the time they're coming in with these unrealistic expectations that Corpora and DDL are going to be a magic bullet for all of their different problems. And then when they find out that that's not the case, there's this overwhelming desire to just get rid of it and put it to one side and go back to the way that they were doing things before. So differentiation in the training and then differentiation in the way that the different teachers engage with their different student bodies and different needs and different curricular goals is very, very important, as is the timing of the intervention. It shouldn't be just something that's done, say, in the middle of the school year, in the middle of the term. It should never be seen as an optional extra, rather than the way that they put it is this is how things are done here approach. So when you come to this school, these are the tools that you use. These are the things that you should be doing. So all kind of really useful points there that I hope that you'll take with you into your own DDL interventions in the future. Teachers can do DDL without the applied linguist, and I think both of my interventions here have shown that, but continued support, scaffolding, assistance, and support is key. It's not just the case that an applied linguist can go in and provide a magic bullet to all of the teachers' different problems. Teachers and their students need to be able to differentiate DDL to what they're doing, the work that they're doing, their own curricula, and promoting a DDL culture in at the student level, at the teacher level, at the curriculum level, and at the institutional level is very, very important if you're going to get buy-in from each of these major stakeholders. And this is something that I think is really rare in most of the present research on DDL, and something that we all need to be working on as DDL practitioners. The best way then for this to happen is for the teachers themselves maybe to then, once they've got a bit of that corpus literacy developed, they then provide workshops to their own colleagues on the things that they've learned and try to demonstrate and showcase some of the things that they can do so as to impress their colleagues and to provide a realistic and very grounded take in what Corpora can and cannot do for those people working within those contexts. So that's where the applied linguist will really kind of step back and say, okay, I've given you the tools, I've given you the kind of the possibilities that are out there. Now you go ahead and you make that work within your context, with your students, your colleagues, your institution. And fortunately, though, that is still some way off. But we do keep trying, and through conference talks like this and through all of the different interventions that so many of you are doing around the world at the moment, we are heading in the right direction. So just keep trying, everybody. As I said, do check out that paper in Call that came out just a few months ago. And if you'd like to work with me on any EDL related projects or any other related projects similar to this, either now or in the future, do send me a mail at this address. Okay, thanks for listening. I really hate pre-recording these things. It's always been very awkward, but I look forward to taking questions from the live audience at EUROCALL2022. So that's it from me. Enjoy the rest of the conference.